New Spring, the prequel novel to The Wheel of Time. After I did a video kind of checking in at my halfway point read through of The Wheel of Time, it got like 10 times more views and comments than I thought it would get, which still isn't many. Sooner than I meant to. Here's another video talking about what I thought of New Spring. I don't know exactly who I'm talking to on here. I don't know if I'm talking to people who've read the books already or who maybe are interested in reading the books. So I'm going to keep this mostly spoiler-free. Again, maybe some minor hints at small things, but I know there's a lot of information on the Wheel of Time out there. Several wiki sites, lots of Reddit posts, but I haven't really gotten into any of those too much yet. I started to a little bit with this, and I realized that there's nothing that I can really add to that conversation yet. I'm just a dude who's reading it for the first time, enjoying it so much that I want to talk to people about it. I have no authority on the subject except for my own experience with the novels so far. So why did I choose to read it after book 6? That's a great question. From what I gather, there's a lot of conversation about like when to read it in the series, whether you should do it before you start, somewhere in the middle, in publication order, somewhere at the end. It doesn't seem to really matter. I think the books were all written so that you could read this whenever. That being said, Daniel Green on YouTube, I think, said to read it after book 5, and I didn't have it at the time that I finished book 5, so I just started on 6 and read it after 6. I will say that I liked reading it where I did. It's the only experience that I've had doing it so far. I think there were some things in here that were sort of recently introduced in the main series that were kind of reiterated here or re-solidified. Things like Aes Sedai power dynamics, or how people can handle the heat or the cold and not seem to have it affect them. Those are just two small examples, but those kinds of things I think made it really nice to read right after 6, because those things had just been introduced in the main storyline. That being said, I think it would have been just as good right before 6 as it is right after. So I don't really know. That's just where I read it. I think I'm getting ready to start reading what has been referred to as the slog. I think some people consider that going all the way back as far back as book 6 up through book 10. I've heard other people say it's just books 8 and 9, so it varies from person to person. I'm about to start book 7, and so that was another reason I chose to do this book now, to kind of get a little bit more momentum or wind in my sails before I run into this slog. The other reason I chose to do that was because this is, maybe minor spoiler, but some of the characters that may or may not be dead, I have a hunch they're going to come back. I wanted to read more about them, if that's not too spoily. And they were in this book. So I thought that was kind of a good reason to do it when I did. There were a few things that made reading this book fun for me. Mostly, I would say, the characters in this book, getting to see them before they became what they are in the main series. So particularly Moiraine, obviously, seeing her less composed and less polished, kind of like starting to cut her teeth, so to speak, as an Aes Sedai, and a little bit more of her background, her relationship with Siuan and with Lan is, kind of the whole point of this book, really. There were a few other things that I thought were fun to see, what it was like. You get to see a little bit more of what it's like in the White Tower. Moiraine is starting to hint at the tower being empty, which is a main theme throughout most of the series so far, but it hasn't quite hit as hard in the prequel. There's also you get to see a little bit more behind the curtain in the tower, what it's like to become an Aes Sedai, and then some of the politicking and things that go on within the tower. And then understanding how those two, Moiraine and Siuan, kind of got connected to the task of finding the Dragon Reborn. Like I said, I haven't gone into too much of the surrounding context around, the author and the publication or any of like the outside stuff from the series. But it sounds like New Spring was originally written as a short story and then turned into a novel with the intent of it being a trilogy prequel. The other two books were, I think, going to focus on perhaps Rand's dad and I can't remember who else, and those two never got published. So this is kind of a standalone prequel. It would have been great, I think, to have those other two. It would have been a fun trilogy. As a prequel, you kind of know where it's going to end, but it's still a fun adventure and a little bit more backstory and lore and context for the characters that you see. One of the themes I think that is prevalent throughout the series as a whole, but was also evident in this book, was the idea of these friend groups kind of splitting apart and coming back together. That happens, between Moiraine and Siuan here. My hunch is that that's kind of the main theme of the series. So it was cool to see kind of a similar aspect of that being reflected in the prequel. Another thing I noticed that I am realizing is present in all of the books so far, but for some reason became really clear to me while reading this, is the change in perspectives. When Robert Jordan changes perspective from being one character into being another character are really kind of fun. One instance in this book is when it's between Lan and Moiraine, there's some things going on between them, and Lan's interpretation of those events is dramatically different than Moraine's interpretation of those events. To see it from Lan's perspective, and then it immediately shifts and retells that same thing from Moraine's perspective, and I just found that really fun, I guess. It happens throughout the main series a lot, but was something that I guess finally struck me, or I noticed it for once. Particularly you see those, like that change of perspective between characters of vastly different customs. So if one, is used to a particular set of manners, they might interpret certain actions as being very rude, whereas the other person interprets them as being something entirely different. And you just get to see both of those, how the other person's mind is interpreting the same thing. So this book is relatively smaller compared to the other ones. I mean, this is only 300-ish pages, where the others are closer to 900 or 1,000 pages, I think. So there's not a whole lot else to say about it. I just thought I'd jump in, give my thoughts. Like I mentioned earlier, I don't know exactly who I am talking to, who's watching these videos, and what your experience is with the Wheel of Time. So leave a comment and tell me what your thoughts are, if you've read it or not, what you're looking for. And let me know what you think the slog is. What was it for you? Was it books 8 and 9, 7 through 10? I'd be curious to know, and maybe why. If you've seen both of my videos, then you truly are a friend of mine now. So hit me up, let's hang out. We'll talk Wheel of Time. Okay, thanks, bye.